Paltrocast.
Cutting straight into it, I've been aware of you for a long time, thanks to Drive Through Records, thanks to working with Mike Viola, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm so glad to see that this memoir happened. One thing I couldn't figure out, though, is when you started writing it.
Well, I wrote sort of the initial essays for the book probably in the summer of 2019. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of when I had, like, the genesis of the idea arrived, where I had this, there was this situation where my sort of the grand piano that I grew up playing, the one that I learned to play on, started writing music on. My parents were moving, and I found out, sort of after the fact, that they were planning on selling it, and I was like in shock. And so I found myself, sitting down. I was in an airport in Orange County, waiting to fly to one of a million places, I'm sure, at that point, and ended up having this, like, writing this essay, which was a conversation with that piano. And it just sort of put me back in my childhood and what it was like to come up with, an instrument almost as your best friend, and so I had done that. And at that point I shipped it off to my manager. I said, because I'd been approached about doing books in the past, and I was like, I had put my toe in the water, but I couldn't find a way in. And I hit up my manager and I said, I think this is a way for me to tell my story, And so we had started having conversations with publishers and had gotten a deal kind of teed up, but wasn't sure when I was going to have the time to do it, and, fast forward to March of 2020. And I remember I remember in the days leading up to the lockdown, when it seemed really apparent that the lights were about to turn out for all of us and that my tour probably wasn't going to happen. And I think my wife looked at me and she said, "This is your chance." And so I began sort of in earnest in March of 2020.
Got it. I am a terrible reader in that if I like the topic, I will devour the book in a day and a half. But if it's fiction, I can't do it. I can really only read memoirs and books about music. So naturally, your book is in my wheelhouse. I'm curious if you read a lot of memoirs before writing this book.
I read a couple, but it wasn't really, once I got into the writing of the book, I really couldn't even get myself to read anything. I mean, I didn't start reading again until like a few months ago, because it was just like, I was so locked. It's the same way I am when I'm working on like an album. A lot of times I just have to shut down all other noise and just throw myself at it. But I did read a few. I read one about this chef. I'm spacing on her name now, but the book was called Burn the Place. I found it to be a really great memoir. My publisher actually sent that to me and said, I think, this is something that was done really well. And I did, yeah. I mean, I read a couple others, but it was, I think for me, because I was just jumping into a whole universe of an art form that, while I read quite a bit, it was nothing that it's nothing that I've tried to do before. And I felt in a way like I did when I first started writing music, which was, perhaps if I just do this blind and on instinct, with some good guidance from my publisher, as I'm finishing pages, that would be better than trying to emulate or onboard too much of what other people have already done. Whether that pays off for me in the end has yet to be seen. But that was my approach.
I find that extremely generalizing on my end. There's really two kinds of musician-related memoirs. There's the one where the person clearly doesn't remember too much, and it's like, here's the cool stuff I did. It's basically an extended Wikipedia entry. Like if you read Vince Neil from Motley Crue's book, you go, okay, clearly he doesn't remember anything. And then there's other people who just lead into it, where the first page of the book is, so there I am in the ER. They tell me I have 30 seconds to live, and it's super candid. And you're super candid, and you seem to remember everything, which it's kind of that, but at the same time, it's not like a recovery memoir. So I'm curious if you knew outright what the story was before you started writing it.
Well, look, I'll only push back against the idea that I remember everything, because I definitely don't, and I think there are places within the book that I make a really specific point to say, this is this is where this lands for me. You know, I think the beauty of memoir is it gives you the freedom to paint a visual picture, but it also gives you a little latitude to say, like, these are my memories. This isn't necessarily a statement of fact, you know, but of course I lean towards the things I remembered better than others, you know. But I didn't really know what the story was going to be, honestly, when I started writing it. When I began the book, I actually thought the whole book was just going to be an extended conversation with my three favorite pianos. I mean, that was the brief that I pitched to the publisher in the early stages. And when I sat down to do that, you know, of course, I found myself mowing through a lot of fertile ground just in these sort of piano conversations. And I remember turning in my sort of first draft of what I was working on for Piano 1, you know, and it was, I don't even remember how many pages, but I think my publisher just went through and like, with some effect of a digital highlighter and was like, what is that about? And what is that about? You know, and I think a lot of there were a lot of stories I didn't plan on telling. There were a lot of, you know, I think the book really turns out to be a book about family and trauma and addiction and disease. And these are things that have been very present parts of my life at different times. And you know, I don't think I planned on getting into those things as much as I ended up doing so, but it became, I think, where the book really became a therapeutic tool for me and hopefully one for other people who read it, you know, that it gave me a platform to more deeply navigate through some of these unresolved, you know, issues and tensions and things that I try as I may over years of therapy, you know, never really put down in words in a way that, you know, like I did here, that helped me process through them.
Well said. Wow. Well, without spoiling too much, is it a spoiler? It's your life in a way, but it ends in the wilderness era of your life, that part of your career. So that begs the question, could we see a second book based on the fact that, hey, you haven't spoken much about 2014 to 2021 and really the process of making the Wilderness album?
Yeah. I mean, look, I will be perfectly honest that just writing this book alone was such a journey, and I'm not sure I would have done it if I had known how much of my blood and sweat it would have taken. But yeah, I think it felt like a natural jumping off point for me. I wasn't sure, like I said earlier, I wasn't sure what story I was writing, and strangely, when I got to that final scene, which I won't totally give away, it did in so many ways feel like the natural conclusion of all the themes that I had developed throughout the book. You know, there was so much power in that scene for me professionally and personally. And it felt solution to so many of the things that were covered in the book that that's where I just knew as soon as it was written that this is where I was jumping off. But yeah, I mean, I hope I have a long life, and certainly I think there's a lot to be talked about in this most recent chapter of living. You know, I figure let's get through this one first, and then you know, see if there's a demand for that, I'll do some more living and come back around for sure.
Fingers crossed. Given the title and the concept of the book, I'm curious if there was any interaction with the comedian Neil Brennan.
No. I mean, I know of. I correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't Neil work with Chappelle? Is that?
Yeah, he co-created Chappelle's show, and he had a special called Three Mics. Are you aware about Three Mics?
No, I'm not familiar with it. What's the background?
I'm not assuming everyone in the world saw it or anything like that. I mean, people can have parallel ideas, but basically it was a live performance that I think was a Netflix special where one mic was for one-liners, one mic was for kind of anecdotal stories, and one was for confessions. So it's like a joke was happening here, a long form, and then a sad revelatory thing. So I didn't know if there was anyone on your team that went, look, you've got an entirely original book, but just beware. There's a thing called Three Mics.
Oh, yeah, no, I have not. I'm totally unaware of it. I mean, I do. I mean, I was a Chappelle junkie as a kid, and have certainly kept up with Chappelle, and I think that's where I have sort of a frame of reference for who Neil Brennan is. But no, I haven't seen the special. So, yeah, I mean, I guess
coincidence.
I guess we'll see if it comes back to bite me in the ass. But now I'm going to check it out because I think he's obviously pretty brilliant.
Definitely. And so, as you mentioned, the book really took shape during the pandemic because you had time to do stuff. Was that the only creativity coming out of you, or was there also some songwriting going on at the same time that you were doing the book?
Honestly, it was all book. I mean, I've since wrapping up the book, I've been like working tirelessly in the studio and writing tons of music, and there was definitely a moment in I guess it was sometime before Christmas that I found myself sort of sitting, you know, like if you can see this is my writing space, and sort of, so that's the couch where most of the book got written. And then over my shoulder on this side is the piano, is actually the second piano that's talked about in the book. And yeah, and there was a moment where I said, we were approaching Christmas and New Year's, our pandemic Christmas and New Year's. And I was just like, oh my God. And I did find myself sitting at the piano. I wrote a song called the New Year's Song, just with this hope of maybe 2021 being better than 2020 had been for all of us. And so, yeah, that was the one song I wrote in the process. I mean, I definitely played piano and zenned out and never kept anything, but just sort of played. But that was about the extent of it.
Something that you called to before is that how much work it is writing a book. Unfortunately, I know how hard that is. When I interviewed Ben Folds about his memoir, he was talking about that too, like that it was maybe the hardest project that he ever had.
Yeah.
What was it that, besides having a contract and an attached advance, what was it that got you to finish it and that made you say, okay, I have to do this?
I think it's just once you're in it. I mean, for me, I'm a stickler about loose ends, and I think more so in my 30s than any other time in my life, finishing things is very important to me, and I think I had opened up so many cans of worms in just the initial process of writing that in some way, I think spiritually, and for my own like well-being and mental health, like I had to find my way through them. And in a weird way, the book was really, it was a vehicle towards empathy and forgiveness and, understanding and forgiveness, not just for other people, but for myself and for sort of packing up periods of time in my life that have been loose ends and have sort of stayed in the back of my mind and come and go, whether they're relevant or not. But I just felt like it was essential to finish it. And I also I work on a deadline, and I've become sort of a stickler about deadlines too. I mean, I blew past this one on a number of occasions, but I felt like it was important to do it and to be done with it. And I wanted it to be done when the lights came back on in the rest of the world, so I could get back to doing what I actually know how to do, which is make music. And I feel good about that. I feel, I spent my crazy COVID year, doing something I'm proud of and challenging myself in a way that I think creatively I haven't put my feet to the fire in such a sort of ridiculous and new fashion for myself. So I was glad to get through it.
And one of the things that comes about towards the end of the book is it references having great new management that's helping you focus. And if it is the management that I still think it is, it's run by a person who had a couple of major label deals himself, JD.
Yes, correct.
That's the correct. Okay. So
Yes.
I was curious, when he told you at a certain point in time, hey, you should work with outside songwriters, was that something that you fought against or something you immediately saw value with?
We know it's interesting because JD wasn't the person to do that initially. He was definitely the one who I think harnessed it and made it a soulful process for me. I talk about this in the book, but the first outside songwriting session I went into, other than the stuff that I did, like with friends, like I worked with Matt from Lion K on a couple of Jack's Mannequin records, and I worked with Mark from OAR on a couple songs on their records. But the first sort of LA songwriting session was with this dude Fernando Garibay, who was one of Lady Gaga's producers, and that got set up through my old publisher, and it was actually through my old publisher Ron Perry, who's now the president at Columbia. Is it Sony? I don't remember anymore. But it was actually Ron, after I had sort of let go of previous management and moved on, where I was just ready for a change. I was getting stronger. I think, I was wrapping up a lot of the cancer years and ready to move in a new direction. And I was like, Ron, what's the weirdest room you could put me in? And he put me in with Fernando. And I fell in love with Fernando. I just thought he was amazing, and he taught me so much. And then when I started getting exciting about writing, and I was getting put into some sessions, and I was feeling like, okay, I have new music in me. I don't want to just whatever. I don't want to just throw it away. That's, and I'd made the EP, most of the EP with Mark Williams. And then I again went to Ron, because he was sort of my de facto liaison to the music business at that point. And he said, you should talk to Jonathan. And I'd known Jonathan and Bob forever, just because we overlapped in our worlds. But it was Ron who said that you should go to Crush. These guys they're the best at what they do, but they're also the most inclined to give the artists a soulful experience, but also steer them towards their best music, and make bold choices. And I certainly found that, and have found that to be the case with them. They've really, they've focused me on the things that matter, which is writing big songs that come from the heart and finding ways to get people to hear them,
Yeah. Praise to Crush Music.
Yeah.
Crush Media Management, whatever their name is these days. Two quick questions, and then you're a free man. The first one comes out of nowhere, just like the second one is.
Sure.
First one. Do you have a favorite song by Van Halen?
Do I have a favorite? I will pick a very probably unpopular song, but it's just because of when I grew up, and it would be Right Now.
Can you play Right Now on piano?
I haven't tried. I think I could. I think I probably could, but just what was it like as a kid? I think I was probably in the second grade. Now, those anthems were huge. Granted, it was a much later era of Van Halen, but I loved that jam.
Not a bad answer. And the last question: do you have a TV recommendation you could pass along to somebody who needs a new show to start?
Oh man, I watch so much TV. I could go on for days. I like most people are really into this White Lotus show right now.
Yes.
But the other two that I've been really digging, 100-Foot Wave. I'm a surfer, and so that is a pretty impressive one. And then I just finished the Formula One series on Netflix, which I'm not into car racing, but I found it to be a super compelling sort of psychological view into people who are into very extreme shit. Same thing with 100-Foot Wave.
You are full of surprises. Very hard to define, but thank you for doing this. Congratulations on the book, and looking forward to the new music when it's time.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
Thanks, Andrew. Take care.
Cheers.
Paltrocast.